everyone. So if you are new here, welcome. If you are not new here, welcome back. But if you have been around for a while, you might have already guessed what the topic of today's video is about just based on the thumbnail for the video. Because while a lot of people might think that this beautiful plant sitting behind me here is a philodendron, it actually is not, or at least not anymore. So in several videos I've done in the past, I've briefly touched on the fact that a few years back, a bunch of philodendron were moved from the Philodendron genus into the genus Thaumatophyllum. However, I've never actually given you guys the full list of the plants that were moved, and I've never really honestly given you the full explanation as to why they were moved. And since this plant is the only plant I own that is on that list, and I am pretty sure this plant is in need of repotting, I figured today maybe we could do a little repot and educate session. And let me show you real quick why it is I think this plant needs to be repotted. Do you guys see that? You see that crazy longness there that's coming out of the drainage holes? That's why I'm pretty sure that it is time to take this pot up to a slightly larger pot size. And so I do have everything ready to go to start repotting this plant. I do have our slightly larger pot that we're going to be putting him in. I have some of my forest floor soil mix mixed up and ready to go here because this is really what I would recommend using for these types of plants, and I'll explain why as we go along today in the video. But I'm going to start getting this guy out of his pot, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to give you kind of the brief yet somewhat actually long history of the genus Thaumatophyllum. So the genus Thaumatophyllum was actually originally created back in 1859. And at that time, it only consisted of one plant, and I will flash the name of that plant up on screen for you. And so that was seriously the only plant that was in the genus Thaumatophyllum for 102 years. And eventually, 102 years later, somebody proposed that they move that plant into the genus Philodendron, and whoever they proposed it to agreed, and so the plant was moved. Let's see how this guy's roots are looking real quick. Put this long thing through the drainage hole. And yeah, you guys, pretty root bound. Honestly, not quite as bad as I thought it was gonna be, but I'm definitely feeling like we're okay to go ahead and take it up to this larger pot. So let me set this guy down. And my apologies if you guys aren't gonna be able to see my face much because of all of these giant, beautiful leaves today. But you know, it is what it is. So genus Thaumatophyllum, for all intents and purposes, was done away with when that one plant was moved into the genus Philodendron. But when it was moved into the genus Philodendron, it was actually moved into a subgenus in the genus Philodendron. So a lot of you might not be aware, but there are actually 3 subgenuses, or genera is the correct terminology, within the genus Philodendron. So you have the subgenus Philodendron, you have this subgenus that I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, and then you have this subgenus, and this is the one that the plant that was previously in the original genus, Thaumatophyllum, was moved into. And this particular subgenus is where all of the plants that now live in Thaumatophyllum originally were living within the genus Philodendron. I'm going to start filling up my new pot here with some of my soil. And so each of those subgenera within the Philodendron genus were created because the plants that are in those subgenera are very similar to each other and different enough from the other plants in the broad genus of Philodendron to not warrant being all grouped in as one. And so all the plants that were in the genus, I think it's pronounced Meconostigma. I'm gonna go with Meconostigma. If anybody knows for sure how it's pronounced, feel free to comment down below and let us know. But all of the plants that were in that subgenera had similar traits to each other in the fact that they're what is referred to, or what was previously referred to as arborescent philodendron, meaning that they grow more like trees than any of the other philodendrons in the genus Philodendron. So these are not vining plants, they are not upright philodendron, they grow basically kind of almost like a trunk. But honestly, you guys, that trunk, what that really is just the stem of the plant that is becoming uncovered and visible to you as the leaves die off, as they get older and they just naturally die off. They fall off of that stem and it exposes the stem, and that's what makes what starts to look like a little mini tree trunk, if you will. But these are the only plants within the broad genus Philodendron that have that growth pattern. So why exactly were they moved? Well, in recent years, there's been a lot of DNA study being done about plants in general. And so a lot of times when we're seeing plants being moved from one genus to another nowadays, it's because of some kind of DNA testing that has led scientists to believe that, or not believe, to find out that the plant was related to a completely different ancestral, line of plants that makes it too different from the genus it's currently in to really warrant for it to be a plant that remains in that genus. And that's exactly what happened here. When they did DNA testing on the Philodendron, they discovered that all of the plants in that Meconostigma subgenus all had one common ancestor. And one common ancestor is actually apparently quite different from all of the other philodendrons in the broad genus Philodendron. Apparently there are quite a few that have like multiple, I think it's called like poly, I'll flash it up on screen for you. Whatever this is, means that they have multiple ancestral ties versus mono, what this is, means that they have one ancestral lineage, if you will. And so because of that, it was proposed back in 2018, so not that long ago at all, it was proposed that all of these plants be moved out of the genus Philodendron and into their own genus. And here I have been just chatting away with you guys, and I have put way too much soil in the bottom of this pot. So let me get some of this taken back out. Okay, I think that's better. Let's see if this guy will fit in there, along with the crazy long root. Okay, and that level actually looks really good for this guy. So I'm just gonna try and get this very long root, or I'm not even sure this is a root. This actually might be a rhizome, but whatever it is, it needs to get tucked down in here because it definitely doesn't need to be growing out of the pot anymore. So I'm gonna get this in here, and then I'm gonna start just filling back in around this plant. And so after that proposal was made to move all of those plants out of that subgenera of the Philodendron genus and into Thaumatophyllum, once again, as I mentioned earlier, Thaumatophyllum had basically been retired. But because that one plant that was originally in the Thaumatophyllum genus before it got moved to Philodendron was one of the ones that needed to be moved back, that's why they resurrected that name and moved them into the genus Thaumatophyllum. Now, let's take a look at the full list of philodendron that were moved. There are 21 plants on this list that I'm putting on screen for you. Now, these are the ones that are actually recognized as truly belonging to the genus Thaumatophyllum. However, we all know there are lots of varieties of species of plants, and so you may see plants in your store like the Shangri-La, I forget what the base name of it is. If I can find it, I'll flash it up on screen for you. But that's basically a variety of one of the plants that's already on this list. So this doesn't include every single little variety down the line, but these are your main species that have been recognized as now being in Thaumatophyllum, and every single one of them was previously in the genus Philodendron. Just adding in some more soil here. And so I am using my forest floor mix for this, you guys, because these plants, as I mentioned before, have that tree-like growth pattern. And so they aren't, like I said, vining plants at all. They're not epiphytic in nature. They're used to living on the forest floor and rooting into that forest floor. So that is why I'm using this mix instead of, for example, like my epiphyte mix, which I would use for my vining philodendron because they're more epiphytic in nature. But this plant really needs more soil, if you will, in order to have better water retention because that's what it's used to. But it also just needs that extra drainage to avoid root rot and any kind of nasty things like that. And I am just trying to remove some of the old dried up petiole sheaths off of here while I am doing this because really there's no reason to leave those sitting on your plant. I find that leaving dead stuff like that on your plants can also attract pests. And since we know I have recently been having a spider mite issue, definitely don't need anything attracting more pests in this household. But yeah, so basically that is the story of why these plants were moved. I do believe that it makes perfect sense from a scientific standpoint when they looked at the DNA and how similar they were to other philodendron, or more importantly, how different they were to move them. Now, this is a fairly straightforward example of pretty much everybody agreed they needed to be moved. Some other plants is not been as straightforward with. And, that's why you're constantly seeing changes. It's just the more they find out about plants, and like I said, DNA testing is really what's driving all of these changes in recent history. But the more they find out about plants, the more they just reevaluate where they need to live. Because back in the day, they were just like assigning them to genus based on, you know, physical characteristics that they were observing when they would discover these plants in the wild, and they would look at like how their inflorescence came in, how their leaves grow, how they attach to the base of the plant, all of those kinds of things. Do they pup? Is it only ever one single plant? Are they a clumping plant? Do they have rhizomes? Do they have bulbs? This was just all observation before. So now that we have the technology to look closer at the actual DNA of a plant, we are able to better understand and more accurately group plants, if that makes sense. But I absolutely love the plants in the genus Thaumatophyllum. I will say one of the things that drives me a little bit nuts about them, which I'm sure you've noticed while I've been doing this, is that they tend to kind of sprawl out. I do have some plant Velcro on this one to help kind of keep things up, but I did remove some of it right before I started this video because I did feel like it was starting to choke off some of these leaves, and some of the ones that were in that section that was pretty tightly wrapped had yellowed and died in the last week. So I was kind of like, I might be choking this plant to death. So I took that off, and I will probably later today try to like kind of redo my wrapping to get this a little bit more upright. But absolutely love these plants. They're very hardy plants. They will last for years and years and years. And honestly, they typically don't have to be repotted that often from what I have heard. Now, I've had this one for a year and 1 month at this point, and you saw how the roots looked. It wasn't crazy root bound, but it was definitely more root bound than it was when I bought it. When I bought it, it was just kind of root bound right around the base of the root ball and nowhere else. But I have heard that it does just take a while for them to really kind of get excessively root bound and everything, which is why I really only took this one up 1 inch larger in terms of pot size, not even 2 inches. So really, he's just getting a little bit of extra soil at the bottom and a little bit around the sides, which should be fine for him, especially since he is living in a north-facing window of my house, and we are in winter right now. And so the amount of light he's getting right now is not as great as it will be during the spring and summertime. And in case you guys didn't notice, I did just leave his roots alone. There was no reason for me to mess with them. The soil he's been in is a perfectly fine soil for him as well. What I'm giving him is a little bit chunkier, but he'll be fine with having that old soil still on that root ball. I would rather not mess with the roots if I don't have to. Now, if I have to, like if it's in horrible soil or whatnot, I'm gonna do it. But luckily, this guy was in good soil. So I've got him packed back in here. Well, not packed, I didn't like pack the soil down, but you know what I mean. I've got him tucked back away, I guess I should say, in here, looking nice. And one other thing I did want to touch on, you guys, about the naming conventions for some of these plants, because I'm sure some of you have also noticed that when these plants get moved from one genus to another, sometimes the name changes, not just the first part of the name that's the genus, but sometimes the second part of a plant's name might change as well. And there's several reasons for that. So for example, I'm trying to think, the rattlesnake Calathea, when it got moved from the genus Calathea into Gophertia, it was originally, hopefully I don't say this backwards, it was originally Calathea lancifolia. Yes, originally Calathea lancifolia. When it got moved to Gophertia, it became Gophertia insignis, I believe. I'll flash up on screen as usual if I'm wrong about that. So when things like that happen, there can be several reasons for it. So for example, you may already have a plant in the genus that it's being moved into that has like lancifolia as the second part of its name. So in that case, they would either have to rename the one that was already in that genus that the plant is getting moved to, or rename the plant that's getting moved there. And since the plant that's already in that genus has been there for longer, they probably are gonna keep that one named what it is, and they'll change the name of the other one. Now, in this case, there's an interesting backstory to this specific Thaumatophyllum right here. So this is Thaumatophyllum bipinnatifidum, and originally this plant was misclassified as 2 separate plants instead of just 1 plant. So when it was in Philodendron, it was Philodendron bipinnatifidum, and then there was a slightly different variety, not even a different variety, just a different growth pattern, like a slightly different growth pattern. Maybe it grew slightly smaller than this version. And so because of that, and like I said, back in the day, they just had to go off their observations, it was determined that it was a completely different plant, and they named that one Philodendron Siloam. Hold on, you guys. Let me check my notes real quick, because for some reason that is now like not jiving in my brain. No, I'm right. I don't know why I question myself sometimes, you guys. I just do. Get in my own head. Philodendron Siloam, which is what a lot of you probably knew this plant as. Now, it also has a bunch of common names such as Philodendron lickety-split, I think is one, or split-leaf philodendron. But scientifically, it was originally thought there were two different plants, but later on, it was determined that they were actually the same plant. So that's why Philodendron bipinnatifidum was kept and Psilolum was done away with. Now you're still gonna hear people call it Psilolum all the time. It's on plant tags everywhere. But technically bipinnatifidum was the first name that it was given. And so that's why they kept that one. And that's why when this was moved into Thaumatophyllum, it was moved over as Thaumatophyllum bipinnatifidum. Now, interestingly, the original plant that was in the genus Thaumatophyllum that I had mentioned to you guys earlier, the Sprucianum, I believe it is, that is actually what is commonly known as the Philodendron goldii. So I tried to find out where the goldii name came from. I could not figure out why at some point after it was moved into Philodendron, because it was moved into Philodendron as Sprucianum. I don't know why it suddenly became called the goldii. I really tried to figure that out for you guys because I'm sure some of you saw that one up there and were questioning it. But really, honestly, I don't know. I tried. I really tried, you guys. I tried, but I couldn't find it. Sometimes I strike out. But obviously, because it was the original plant in Thaumatophyllum, the only plant in Thaumatophyllum, when they moved it back into Thaumatophyllum, they gave it its original name that it had when it was originally placed in that genus. So that's why it's not Thaumatophyllum goldii. But just a little bit of extra, background there for you guys on why sometimes names get changed the way that they do when plants move from one genus to another. But hopefully this video has helped you guys out today because I have been getting a lot of questions from you guys on philodendrons that I did not mention in my previous philodendron videos. And you guys have been asking, is it a crawler or is it a climber? In most cases, the ones that you're asking about are neither because they are actually now Thaumatophyllums. So once again, hope this has been helpful. If so, please be sure to click that like and or subscribe button down below. And if you haven't had a chance to check out my other philodendron videos yet, you can check out one or both of them next right here. Thank you so much for joining me today, you guys, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Aloha!